ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the latest episode of the DotPro Wednesday show. I am, as usual, your host, Korean Barbecue, with Woodshrew. How's it going, Shrew?
Doing all right, man. Had a kind of a tiring weekend of camping and outdoorsmanship, but I'm happy to finally be at my desk and talk some Dota.
Nice. We'll talk about this more later, but this is going to be our last episode before the Manila Major, and then we're going to have some other. We'll have to see afterwards. Basically, we'll always find something to fill this time, but we have some other different personal plans that we'll get into later. But with that said, we're here to break down and basically preview the Manila Major, and which is going to start group stage in less than 2 weeks, and exciting. Although this almost feels like a forgotten major in some sense, in that everyone's so focused on TI, the rosters are locked through TI, and there hasn't been a whole lot of really promotion or fanfare leading up to it. So that's maybe it's not as much on people's radar, but yeah. I just want to say that as far as the talent choices, being announced to the public relatively late, and the other things, it's because I think this is a step in the right direction. I think Valve has taken a more hands-on approach to this, and I think they kind of felt that they had to after the previous major and stuff like that. So I think there's a good reason behind that. Mm. And to start our preview, let's go to the winners of the last major, Secret. So we're gonna play a word association game. Sure, I'm gonna give you a team, and then we'll play some word association, and we'll start from there. And what's the word that comes to mind when you think of Secret?
Unique. Very unique. I guess I'll present my my argument, I guess. But I just think that they just are like an exceptional team. Like, it's kind of hard to get an idea of how they're performing, because they can kind of go so far in the dumps with, like, remember that really lengthy losing streak in like the winter season, and yet they can achieve so much out of, like, kind of nowhere, like put it all together and play like the best team in the world, which was demonstrated at the Shanghai Major. And of course, just because of their roster talent, they are capable of doing some stuff that I just think they are just uniquely equipped just with their roster, and just in terms of, like, the individual players, and they're all kind of very heady and opinionated players as well, and they have their own unique approach to playing Dota, and I think that will have an imprint on the style of play that Secret will take to Manila.
The word for me here is potential, and that word gets thrown around a lot, but obviously this team was formed and expected to be almost a new dream team, incredibly dominant, like harkening back to the Secret of last spring, and won all those matches in a row, and that hasn't really happened yet. And if you're Secret, you're probably thinking, would we rather be like last spring, where we won a bunch of matches, but then coming into TI, people, we didn't do so well in TI? Or would you rather have it be the other way around? And that seems to, as you said, that seems to be their MO. They have in-between tournaments and stretches where they don't do so well, but they win big events, and they do well at majors, which we've seen with the two majors so far, winning one of them and coming in second at the other. And so, yeah, this is a team that, with their new roster and kind of dream team acquisition, a lot was expected of them, and it hasn't really gelled just yet, I guess. And so I think it will at this tournament. I've got them in my top 8. Where do you have them finishing?
I see them in top 4. I see them top 4. Top 6, top 4. But my fanboyism will put all the chips in the top 4 pile.
Okay, so the other part, of the breakdown is, like, we project them to do pretty well. Like, I wouldn't be surprised at all if it was a top 4. And do you think that'll be enough to get them a TI invite, or will they have to be, somehow going through qualifiers for TI?
I think anything outside of 16th place, I think Secret will get an invite, because they got second place at Frankfurt, correct? And then they got first place at Shanghai, in terms of the majors. Unless they bottom out and just start losing to everybody, and combined with like in tournaments between now and TI, and they get like 16th place, that's like maybe the only way they could put themselves in jeopardy. But just with those combined two finishes, it should warrant almost a guaranteed invite for Team Secret. What do you think, Jack?
Okay, I agree with you. I think this brings up actually a really interesting point, the criteria for selection. On a certain level, it's it's going to be very subjective no matter what, and it's the confidence you have in the players, what the players have done before. This is when they reshuffle or make a new team, and to some extent, I think the brand really factors in and where they represent. And so, I'll get into this later with EG, but I feel like there are certain teams that are going to just get more of a chance to slip without having to prove as much, and they'll still get invited. And I don't know if I'd go so far as to place them, anywhere, basically anywhere they're going to get an invite, because this is a different team than the one that had success at those previous two majors. And even though they still have the big names, I don't know. I kind of don't know because their results have been very inconsistent. So I feel like they need a top 8 to feel very confident about a guaranteed invite to TI. As strange as that sounds, as unimaginable as that sounds for a team with this roster of players, and I just could be totally wrong because obviously I'm not making the decisions here, but I don't know. I feel like if you kind of stumble through these tournaments and then the major, I don't know if you're just going to get that spot. And additionally, the next question that comes up is where are they classified? Because we know about the team house in Turkey, but they have 3 North American players, right?
Yeah.
And so I've been like I don't know to what extent how would you even classify them? And each region is going to get a certain number of invites, or you're going to want representation from each region. And so if they're classified as EU, then I'm not really sure if they would, depending on how other teams do, if they just get that invite, if they really struggled at this tournament. If they're classified as NA, then I think, almost certainly then in that case.
I think the organization will be classified by Valve as Europe. I think it's pretty convincing. Okay, so at the start of the season, they had 4 out of 5 players were European background because Weehaw and Misery were both from Europe, right? And the organization, in terms of, I guess the owner, he is, I guess he's Turkish, I believe. Right. I can't remember for certain. And I guess you classify that as Central Europe or whatnot. Sorry, my geography for Europe is not great, but those 2 facts alone should pretty much lock them in. And in terms of just by feel, I just couldn't see Team Secret being placed in the American qualifiers because it would be kind of just ruining that entire qualifier bracket for what it really should represent, which is an opportunity for the American, actual grassroots teams to have a chance to make it to TI, and not for this mostly European juggernaut to just wipe the board, right? That would be kind of just, in terms of just the Valve kind of parenting role that they have with Dota 2, it seems kind of in violation of their core principles, right? So.
Right, so that's kind of the point, because
right.
The question becomes, if they're classified as an NA team, are they then more likely to be invited, even if they struggle here, because of what you just said, and because NA isn't really a deep region, although it's getting deeper, more or less with these teams that have more European players on their roster than Americans, but are committed to training and living at team houses, talking about Complexity and DC here, that are in the United States. And so they can be more reasonably classified as NA teams because they're NA organizations playing in NA. And so the question becomes then for Secret, because they have NA players, but they play to some extent at Team House in Turkey, where are they classified? And I think if they're if they're EU classification, they would have to do better, I would argue, to get an automatic spot. And I think that's what it comes down to. But I think a top 8 is, I think we're both projecting a top 8, and we both think that a top 8 will be enough to get them in.
Yeah.
All right, next up, Liquid, who finally been one of the most consistent teams.
Okay. This was tough. Um, I'm thinking chemistry, honestly. I think chemistry. I think because Dota is becoming, I mean, it's becoming almost like our show meme to be like, Dota's a teamwork game. But in terms of the teams that have just demonstrated just exceptional teamwork, I think it's a short list between Liquid and Newbie. And they kind of just fit together like this well-oiled German and like engineered engine, with every piece kind of fitting together in just a really brilliant way. And I think they've stuck together for so long, and they've become so comfortable with each other's playstyles, and they've kind of settled in on in terms of like the roles that each player has. I don't see at least I don't see in their core positions uh, like their responsibilities from change from game to game in a very drastic way. And so I feel like with that kind of stability and just how good of a fit they are, I feel like chemistry represents the Team Liquid kind of core essence.
Okay, that's I the fair enough. The word association I've got for them is consistency actually,
Mm.
and the team that I would think they replace in that category is EG, because even though this last EG team before when they still had obviously Artesian Universe, they finished I think top two of every single event basically since their formation, with the exception of ESL One New York, their first tournament together, and with the exception of another tournament where they finished third. I believe it was one of the majors. So that team was the epitome of consistency to me. And in the end, is it enough? Because when you win stuff, it's like a different ethos from Secret, where they would struggle and they would win, and the winning arguably brought them a lot more kind of acclaim and recognition versus a team that had just played consistently throughout the year, which EG had done. And who knows to what extent that contributed to the roster change. And so I think Liquid has kind of replaced EG
Yeah.
in that position. From like the very time they were like this team was formed, basically. I think they won the defense season 5. I think that was their first, like this team's first edition together. I could be wrong. I think D2CL before that they won as well. And then let's see, like basically third at WCA, Star Series third, and ESL One Manila, they came in second. They finally won Epicenter, of course, and at the
Mm.
major Shanghai Major they came in second. So this team has, in that EG vein, been a mortal lock for basically top three at just about every event that they've played. And so yeah, for me it's consistency. I would once again be surprised if they didn't finish top four at this event. And I think even with like a total collapse or like a very disappointing finish, I think they're almost certain to be invited to TI.
Yeah, I like actually the word association that you came up with, because this team has kind of just been knocking at the door of just actually being a truly elite team. And when I say elite, I mean like global elite, like just with the placements that we just mentioned of the tournaments. They have the results, I think, maybe more than any other team going into Manila Major. Like those results speak for themselves, and that Epicenter tournament was a statement win against maybe one of the other most strongest teams and hottest teams coming into the major. But we'll get to that later. So
Yeah, and so yeah, they're probably in the best place right now,
mm.
arguably because of the stability and the results, and we both think they'll do well. Um, Next up, we have Evil Geniuses, and yeah, what's your association here?
Okay, well, one step, Jack, because we do want to mention the placement that they need to get to invited to TI, right? Are we still gonna do that for Team Liquid?
Oh yeah, yeah, I kind of did my part on that, but what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, they've I don't know. It's kind of hard for me to answer this one still, because yeah, I think they've pretty much locked up their bid for the international, because again the tournament success and with them coming so close in the previous major. But yeah, I just don't think that this major will have a great impact on their international invite. Like it's more than secured at this point, I think. So yeah, we can move on. I just want to put that in there.
Well, you brought up something that's interesting because one thing about the majors, they've basically stuck to this like GSL format, right?
Mm.
So if you struggle, you could potentially be done at the tournament. I think with like within 5 games.
Yes, very,
Because
very
I
fast.
think the lower bracket first round is now, whereas it was a BO3 in Frankfurt, and so for for a team to go 0-5, depending on who your group draw is, it's even like a good consistent team, it's not that outside the realm of
Yeah.
possibility, right? Like how much does it really say about you compared to like obviously TI where you play basically everyone in the round robin phase, and so you get a lot of information, a lot more games. It just doesn't seem that inconceivable that a team could lose 5 games or lose whatever it is in that series, and so that probably has an impact on it, and you know that probably determine how many different winners you have, or the groups start to matter that much more because of that format. And so, yeah, I think even if Liquid had like a cold streak and they went say 0-5 or 1-5 or something, or
Yeah.
2-5, like the body of work is just still there with the consistency
Yes,
to put
exactly.
them at TI.
I just want to add, like, that's a great point, Jack, because this format, in an in a way, it is much more accurate of measurement of how good are the top performers and not the bottom performers, right? Because you get a pretty good sense of just how good the best teams match up and order, right? It's like the accuracy of the measurement increases higher up the standings, but as you get lower, it's just of all these teams that kind of just didn't have that much of a chance. Maybe they, because again, it's the best of one. You have those two entrance best of one rounds in the lower bracket, where you can just tank and just never get really a chance, right? So
Yeah, and also because you're kind of expecting the groups to be made with like some kind of seeding process in mind, similar to like World Cup groups, where
yeah,
you're going to have like a couple of teams you think are really strong, but you're not going to put them all together,
yeah,
obviously. And so it's yeah, like given that they'll probably be considered a top seed or the strongest team in their group, it's really not out of the question for them to drop a series or two, and and then who knows if you're down in the lower bracket. And so yeah, I think the results put them in a pretty safe place. Which leads us to evil geniuses. What's your word for them?
uh, unknown. It's just it's still just not put together for me. That might end up actually being, unfortunately, some descriptions for some other teams, but for Ichi, it's just a huge question mark. Uh, I still just don't know where they really stand in the roster of like the strong teams coming into Manila. It would be a pretty big surprise if they didn't place in the upper half, like let's say like top 8. But then again, in my mind, it wouldn't be that big of a surprise, right? Because we just don't know what this team is capable of right now. We in our minds we can kind of envision like this team clicking and getting into gear, but as of this moment, it's just unknown to me. I don't know how good EG is. That's kind of weird to say.
Yeah, you know, to be honest, I can't remember the last time I had EG outside of a top 8 at any event.
Yeah.
But and it feels strange, and I hope I'm wrong about this, but I actually have them in the top 8, finishing in the bottom 8 rather of this event, and
Yeah.
I I just feel like yeah, they could click and it could all come together, but their performances at recent tournaments have looked very unlike them, and like even in the past when they lost games or lost series, it
Mm.
seemed pretty clear that they knew what they were doing or what their plan was, and say they would lose a game or not execute. But it really looked very weird at this last tournament at Epicenter. Like I just saw some games where it was like, what was the plan here, or like no one seems to be itemizing along like the same idea for executing, and so I don't know. I have to wonder if there aren't bigger issues going on
Mm.
within the team, if there aren't questions about maybe a position switch again back to the original positions,
Mm.
and I don't know. I don't just with that in mind, with those data points in mind, since the reshuffle, I can't put them in the top 8.
Um. So what do you think in terms of the minimum placement to get into TI for these guys
Well, so this is where the issue we talked about earlier comes up, which
with the
is
roster switch, right?
yeah. So they're clearly and unequivocally an NA team. like without doubt. And um, because of that, and because like they are like the flagship representative more or less of NA, or like they have been in terms of the brand, the consistency, like the pedigree. It's been there for so long. So if you're gonna have teams from NA, you pretty much have to invite them.
Hmm.
And like because of the prestige and the trust that their brand and team has built, they're usually not gonna field a team that is like that it would have trouble in the qualifiers anyway. Generally speaking, like they're not gonna field a team that like would struggle against NA's tier 2 squads. That's regardless of where they drop, right? So again, this is one of the situations where because they're an NA, and also because obviously of the names on their roster, I just have a hard time believing that they would not get to TI,
Yeah.
not get invited to TI, even if they like finished abominably in this tournament.
Mm. And
So, yeah, go ahead.
coming back to it, like when we were just talking about results at majors, they've got two third places, albeit with Arteezy and Universe at the time, but it's still two major, like just really solid finishes at two of Valve's majors. So it just kind of pushes that, I think, over the top combined with your argument, Jack. So I think they're also pretty, like, they're pretty much good to go. Like, it's so hard to imagine them not getting invited, even with like a, 13 to 16th place finish at this major.
Yeah, and that's where it becomes more convoluted because obviously it's not the same team, but you do trust a core that, one TI, a core of players that,
Yeah, that's
yeah.
also true.
So
That's a great, also, that's another great point, too. Kind of the reigning champions of international, so they almost kind of get a write off. Remember with
yeah,
Nuki
so
last year?
unless this roster looks entirely different,
Yeah.
um, but you know what? That raises another interesting question too, because the second part of our hypothetical is, um, what finish would cause them maybe to have to drastically reevaluate their roster?
Like a role
Um,
swap, or like you thinking like players
well, I
change?
mean, just like a bigger outright roster change, like the one that was reported about Fear and Sumail.
Um, I don't know. I think it might be too late in this season. I feel like it it doesn't seem to be in like the kind of the in the EG spirit and just the way that PPD kind of captains. I just don't see him kind of always any revamping the roster that like all the major changes that have occurred to EG have not been with EG instigating or catalyzing that change, right? I feel like the amount of trust that the players have to one another, even if they placed 13, 16, it would take like more than just a kind of a Dota performance issue. I feel like they know that they can work together towards maybe improving in time, even with a very poor finish. But only if something really dramatic happened in terms of like inner conflict within the team, and like a total loss of trust in PBD or some kind of conflict between players or management, that kind of thing. That's what I think. What about you?
Right. So this is where it gets really interesting because let's take it from like maybe a player perspective
Okay.
and think about if they really struggle in Manila and the choice comes to between we're going to keep this roster together and we're guaranteed to get invited to TI, but we feel that we have, say, not that great a chance of doing well,
Mm.
versus, you know what, we might have to make a player change to like one or two players. We'll lose our guaranteed invite, but we'll be able to breeze through the qualifiers and we'll have a better chance of winning TI. That becomes a much more difficult decision to make. And so I mean, I as a big EG fan, like for a long time, I hope they just totally prove me wrong and just blaze through this and figure it all out, and you have the TI5 chemistry kind of going again. But
Yeah.
if they don't, it's a really tough spot because that guaranteed invite is like looming in the balance, and you I don't know. It's a hard choice to make.
I think just wrapping up with EG, I think that the only card that they can really play is the role swap card, and even that is a very drastic change this late into the season, with like limited time left to kind of for players to acclimate to the new roles. At the end of the day, I think you have five previous TI winners, and no other free agents are a previous TI winner. I think with like playing at this like current level of caliber, so it's sort of hard to just to be like, yeah, we've been through hell and back with these boys, but I'm gonna take a chance on cancel or someone like that. It's just it doesn't seem consistent with like logically or rationally consistent. But yeah, that's my 2 cents on that.
That's true, but at the same time, we've seen. Yeah, you're right. We'll get past this, but we've seen this team in this situation before because PPD has talked about how difficult a spot they were in before they picked up Sumail, right? And
Yeah.
Sumail wasn't really, you don't know who has a great year is going to be, and they were in a bad spot, and they're having trouble getting people to even consider them. This is Evil Genius we're talking about, the same team that would win TI literally 6 months after that situation, right? Or like less than, or yeah, like a few months after that, they won TI, and they won DAC, and so again, you don't know how these things could happen or how quickly that could shift, or if a player just looks so much better than what the name is. That's always going to be something to get past, more or less. Um, so next up is MVP Phoenix.
MVP Phoenix, huh? It's just hard to fall under like to avoid like the traps of the mainstream descriptions for these guys. It's just it's kind of sad. I also burned the unique thing with Team Secret because MVP is their own kind of special flower. I'll say just surprising. Like they have the potential and the potency to just kind of negate a lot of what we've seen in terms of like these strong performances from Team Liquid and Newbie, and maybe MVP just brings in their own kind of brand of Dota once again and kind of resets like the almost like the meta understanding, and like they just present these ideas that they've been cooking up on their own because I as far as I know they are kind of more of a they're in a more of a closed in kind of situation, right? And so apart from them, their players scrimming in other servers, they kind of have limited other teams to kind of scrim with. And I just feel like they always bring their own flair to each kind of patch and each major tournament. They bring some really solid stuff on their own, and so they have the ability to just really surprise people, I think, and maybe snag a really unexpectedly high spot in the final standings. What about you, Jack?
I think my word for these guys is validation. Um, I like this team and I love like the story and the passion behind it that you've seen from like from Koreans, and it's like this narrative of this like defunct game in Korea, and these guys are like the last bastion and they're able to succeed internationally, and they had that kind of breakout performance at the major that everyone was raving about. Since then though, they did well at Dota Pit, but they also won WePlay. But I think in hindsight, or at least with just a couple weeks to reflect, WePlay might have been the weakest, if not one of the weakest, international land fields that we've seen between these two majors. I believe half the teams, if not more, at WePlay are not at the major. Um, they beat out Vega to win that tournament, and I think third was EG, and there are a couple other teams that are not at this major, and it was a win for them, but still, it was one of those things where it felt like they beat a field that they should have beat, that they should have been the favorite in.
Yeah,
And so it's yeah, my word for them is validation. It's like this is the second straight major to show that they really do belong, and
okay.
I, I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure because as I said a couple weeks ago, it seems like people pay much more attention to this team now, and they're not just overlooked as like just some random SEA team that we don't have to worry that much about. And it first came to light, I think, in the scrims where people were like, hey, MVP Phoenix is really strong, and so. At this point, if you're more worried about them, or if you think that they're a one-trick pony that plays so heavily around their mid lane and does securing that for usually QO, and that becomes out of meta, or if that becomes something you can counter, then I don't know. I'm not sure if they're still as strong of a team, and so that's the validation aspect there.
As far as placements go, I feel like out of the SEA region, these guys are just top flight, and that's pretty much it. Fourth place at Shanghai Major, and with anything outside of like a drastic meltdown, I feel like that's just like the one condition we've been talking about with these really good teams we mentioned so far, or like I guess the early invites, in terms of the list. an order that Valve announced them in. I think MVPs are like a lock, pretty much, as far as SEA region goes. What about you?
You think they're locked for TI?
Yeah, it's just I don't know who else you can really consider seriously outside of MVP and Fnatic, and I just think that MVP has that little bit of gap ahead of Fnatic in their results.
Yeah, I think in this respect they're similar to EG a little bit in what is there in the region. I don't think Hot Six is in the discussion. The other MVP team that made it to TI and beyond. I mean, there are teams like TNC and Execration and stuff, but maybe I'd lump Mineski with them too. But yeah, I also think that you're talking about TI, barring a disaster, MVP is very likely to get an invite together with Fnatic. Then again, we could speculate endlessly about how many teams are being invited and how many are being asked to qualify. And Shanghai showed us that as far as the major system goes, a lot of it is based on just the specific tournament itself. It's not based on like a set structure, right? Because you have such variation in the number of invites. You have 12 invites or 8 invites, and one of them means more qualifiers. Valve has indicated and expressed in their selection process that they want there to be fewer qualifier spots because they don't want teams to be fixated on qualifiers. And they want third-party tournaments to matter more, which I think is a very smart move. And so because of that, if we accept that SEA is getting 2, maybe 3 invites, then yeah, I think Phoenix is pretty set. And I still think they need to finish. I don't have them in my top 8, but I think if they don't finish last in their group, I think they will have dispelled enough doubts to get a TI invite. All right, next up, we've got Wings.
This is gonna be tough because, in all honesty, I haven't watched all of Wings gaming, and the only thing I've got scribbled down is they 3-0 Team Liquid. So, like, that's a thing. That's a serious thing to contend with. I'm just gonna go with like Snake in the Grass. Like, I don't even see you guys coming. I don't even have any real idea of what you guys are capable of. I, it's gonna be just so hard to just. I feel like as Wings in the Chinese scene, it's hard to kind of make their way out of that kind of wall of, okay, you've got LGD, right? You've got Newbie, and you have Vici Gaming Reborn. And for Wings to show up as the 4th Chinese team and kind of just like, hey guys, we're here too, and we 3-0 Team Liquid a couple, weeks back at ESL Manila. Like, we won ESL Manila. Like, we did that. And at the same time, it's like one of the biggest underdogs in this entire field. Which is kind of strange. Like, their result doesn't. They don't really have too much to back up that tournament victory, like back it up behind that. But like, if that's a sign of maybe if like the potential of Wings, then like these guys could just really just maybe dominate. It's just hard to say. Snake in the Grass is what you're just gonna throw in. What do you think, Jack?
Okay, I've got them as my word association is this year's CDEC, and
Ooh, okay.
Okay. So the issue with CDEC, talking to their manager last year, was that they kept losing to LGD in like domestic tournaments.
Yeah.
For like a long stretch before TI, and so it's a little bit different for this team. Like, they did very well in the domestic Chinese scene after the Shanghai Major, when you had these like newly reformed teams, right? So some people were saying, oh well, this team was okay in China before. They stayed consistent. They kept their lineup together. That's why they're doing well. Then they just go to ESL in Manila, as you said, and they just destroy. Like, they play extremely well, and they beat Liquid. They crush Liquid in the finals, and they just look like, wow, like this team is actually pretty legit. And since then, they formed this kind of like Chinese triumvirate with Newbie and VCR, and I think they beat Newbie, which ended Newbie's massive domestic win streak in the Summit 5 qualifiers. Recently, before losing to VCR 2-1. So they're going to rematch Newbie, actually, in the Summit 5 Chinese qualifiers. And so I think they've proven that domestically and within a domestic scene that is strong on the international level right now after the reshuffle, that they're still one of the better teams.
Yeah.
So to me, like, that's a sign that they're still like a very strong team. And I have them in the top 8 for sure for this tournament, and I project maybe a bold guess here, but I think they're going to top 3 this tournament. And I think part of that is because the general perception, people maybe still aren't taking them that seriously. I think the way Innocence and the way they draft is very unpredictable compared to other Chinese teams who kind of usually have more discernible patterns or preferences.
Yeah.
They'll pick just about anything. They have very open views on a lot of heroes. Like recently domestically, they were playing stuff like you haven't seen a Brewmaster much, but they had Brewmaster, they had Ricky. They'll pull out anything in their drafts and they play it very confidently. So I think this year they're going to be the CDC type squad. I think they're going to do well here. Possibly win this event. I wouldn't be shocked if they did. And I think they're going to end up at TI as this year's like Chinese out of the dust type of team.
Well, that was an impressive argument for the Wings Gaming bandwagon, and before it even really makes a stop for everyone else to hop on, I'll reserve my ticket. Like, I'll punch it in. Jeez, Jack. Okay, Wings Gaming. So they don't really have that many results, like I was saying previously. They haven't showed up for any other majors, as far as I know, and they haven't performed outside of ESL 1 Manila, which is still a pretty major achievement of theirs. They don't have anything else to rely on, and so they will have to really leverage a strong performance at the Manila Major to warrant a direct invite. I think. I'm thinking they need top 6 to get an invite, and also look pretty damn good at the same time. It can't be like a top 6 and like kind of beat up on some slumping teams, if that's even possible to do. But yeah, they need to make some real noise and continue to close out the year strong, and I think they'll maybe have an argument for an international invite. Just because if ESL 1 Manila was like a sign of like a torrent of strong performances, then yeah, they have it in the cards to be in a Valve's invitation system.
So this is where I agree with you. I think we talked so much about like brand and stuff. This is really where they're like one of those like you only got one shot type of thing. Like maybe this team is like the Eminem of like the the 8 Mile of the scene or something.
I see it. Yeah, I see that.
Because yeah, it's one of those situations. They don't have the brand, they don't have the names, they don't have the recognition. It's one of those things where if they didn't win ESL 1 Manila, would they get an invite? If they just, let's say they came in 3rd or 2nd even, would they get an invite or would they have to qualify? And I think the answer to that question is they would. I feel like they had to pretty much win that tournament or do incredibly well to get considered as invites to the major. And so, as you said, without that kind of body of work necessarily to validate them, without the names and reputation, they have to. I agree. I think they need to top 8 this event if they want to get an invite to TI. I think if they drop off and people start to say that it was a flash in the pan, or they performed well at a period of instability, then those don't work in their favor because they don't have the recognition. So I agree with you. I think they need to top 8 to make it to TI.
Yeah, absolutely, dude.
All right, next up is Vici Reborn.
I'm just gonna put it out there that I'm losing like words in my vocabulary to even describe things. Like my adjective list is like I'm starting to scrape the bottom of the barrel, boys.
You can come up with 16 adjectives, Shrew. I believe in you.
Oh my goodness. All right, VGR. I haven't even seen them, Jack. Like, I don't. Have you seen them, Jack? I don't. It's been so long since that Star Ladder victory.
I have seen them sparingly.
Like quals kind of thing.
At start, yeah, and in domestic tournaments, the occasional domestic game in China that I'll watch, and they play pretty well against Wings. They're in the Summit 5 finals for the Chinese qualifier, awaiting the winner of Wings and Newbie. And so the big storyline around them was that they won Star Ladder with the stand-in Mikasa, and everyone was like, that was really cool because not only was that like a great story of this very respected coach, but it was like, oh, now you really see the difference between someone who is even a very good player versus someone who's like an elite tier professional player.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah.
You know,
they they have to like lockpick Quap just so he can have an impact and like kind of. It was like so shaky when he was on any other hero or something, and then it's like when he's on Quap, it's like magical, but like everything else was kind of dubious in the mid lane, kind of having a rough time. But yeah, okay, go on, Jack.
Yeah, it was like they had to limit his hero pool, and they pretty much had to expect him to lose mid, and they had to expect him to occasionally be out of position during like
On like a Quap,
clear team fight.
it's like you'll
Yeah.
play Quap and you might split the lane with Sumail, which is like what? Okay, anyways, moving on, right? Like, damn.
So they won that event with the coach as a stand-in, and it was like, wow, this team is legit. And then, the backstory here is this is FY's team, and instead of people saying, "Oh, was FY kicked?" No, the story that came out was that FY wanted to form this team with Yang, who he had played with before, or also known as ZYF, and with the other Yang, their offlaner, and then. This is a team that they formed, and this team just looked pretty ferocious. Like they played very aggressively.
Yeah.
I think FY had to be among the leaders of like average kills and assists on supports. That stat doesn't exist in a vacuum, obviously, so you have to take it with a grain of salt. But this team played very aggressively, and with him setting the pace for it, and they seem to be pretty legit, and their results have held up domestically in China, and so. This is another team that I have almost as a lock for top 8. I said last week that I think the Chinese are going to put on a very good showing at this tournament compared to Shanghai, and I think Vici Reborn is a big part of that. And so,
do you have a word though, Jack?
Yeah, it just occurred to me that I hadn't come up with a word.
Yeah, I was like, do you have any adjectives left? Like, you're leaving me hanging here. The listeners are demanding it.
I'm looking for a word that talks about. See, I just used validation, so I can't go there.
See, see, it's not easy, dude. Can't just say unique.
Okay, sure. Let's go with vindication. All right, so the vindication here is for FY and for the Vici squad that broke apart and that underperformed all those big names, and it's kind of like saying, who was really the engine behind that team, or who on that team was the one who's best positioned to make sure we succeed. If you look at where Vici is now, they've dropped very low in the ELO rankings, which I also wanted to point out that if you look at the Gosu Gamers in Knoxville ELO, the team with the biggest disparity in ELO is Wings. They have a 10-spot difference. They're number 1 in Knoxville's ELO, and they're all the way down at number 11 amongst major teams. But anyway, that's...
On the Gosu list, right?
Yeah, so...
Yeah, Gosu's sleeping. Knoxville's on that Wings... on that Wings noise. On that Wings hype train, but Gosu's sleeping on that.
Well, a lot of that depends on how much ELO you give the teams in their region.
Right.
And so... Vici Reborn is third on Knoxville's and 6th among major teams in Gosu Gamers. I think they're consistent. I think they have good leadership. I think their team has shown that they can. They've been at the top of their scene more or less since the reshuffle. I think they're the real winners of the reshuffle here, and so I think it's validation for FY that he is the key piece and he's what you need at the center of building a team. Now he made the right choice. From picking his teammates to go down to the Vici 2nd Division team and bring them up to the top.
Yeah. As far as placements in this tournament, I feel like it's gonna come to the point where the teams that we kind of described in like almost like a block, they have a similar situation in terms of the way Valve sees them, and it's, hey, we've done well in this one international tournament. We maybe even won it. In Wing's situation, they took ESL Manila. And Vici Reborn, they took a tournament farther back on the calendar, and also lower, I think, in talent pool. I believe, I might actually be wrong. Star Ladder Invitational was pretty stacked. So like in that situation, like they have a good result, but they don't have anything that's kind of backing that up, and they really do need a performance at a major to point towards. And again, it's kind of the top. I think we're starting to get toward top 8 performance for VGR to kind of say, hey, we have a pretty good chance to get invited, maybe even top 6 to kind of like lock that in. But in that region, I think it's similar to Wings is what I'm trying to pretty much get across. Yeah.
So as of this season, I think they had won something like 3 or 4 H Cups in China, which is like a short domestic cup. So they had been really strong in China. Internationally, they won Starladder Invitational, as we talked about. They came in second in the ESL 1 Frankfurt Chinese qualifier. Well, that's domestic rather than international. And so, if you look at the field back at Starladder Invitational, it was you've got Vici, you have Navi, Alliance, LGD, Virtus Pro, Vega, and MVP Phoenix. So every single team except for Vega and Virtus Pro are at the major. And so it was a decent field. At the time, it probably wasn't as strong at the time as people thought because people were like, oh, LGD, are they going to, they're a major team. Are they going to be invited at all? They end up doing well at that tournament and getting invited to the major.
Yeah.
And so there were question marks about a lot of those. Well, people expected probably Virtus Pro to be there as well, to be honest. So, and then that result, again, was not even with their roster at full strength because of visa issues. So, to some extent, I feel like the respect for the Vici name may bleed over and help them a little bit with Vici Reborn in terms of a TI invite. But I agree with you. Just because of the relative unknowns on the roster, I think only 2 players on the roster have TI experience. There's Yang, who played with eHome last year, and obviously FY. I think because of that, I feel like they need to top 8 as well to get an invite to TI.
Mm-hmm.
All right, next up, Fnatic.
The only thing that comes to mind is the drama that they went through, man. Like, replacing the player and everything. Word that represents Fnatic. It's gonna sound kind of bad, but it's just... I need to see something from them. I don't even really have like a word to represent, but I just need to see something from Fnatic. I need you guys to like give us something to really validate, and okay, let's not overuse that word this episode, but to really like, okay, you're getting an invite from SCA, and we all know that SCA is, out of all the regions, like, it's kind of a little shaky in terms of where it stands up to like EU and China, and yeah, they're like they beat up on everyone in SCA, and the team has had like moderate to kind of poor success at the majors. So what I'm referring to is at the Frankfurt majors, they had like a 13th to 16th place finish, basically like essentially tied for last, right? And then at the Shanghai major, they were able to scrap up a 5th to 6th place, and of course that was the major where China just decided not to show up. But we need to see more. Like, we need to see more, and we haven't seen you guys play at any international tournaments between majors, so we need substance, and this is their chance to provide that, because up until this point, I just, it's too many holes in their argument to convince me of them being like a serious team, and not just kind of mailing in the SCA invite. So a little bit harsh on Fnatic, but that's just how I feel.
So based on that, you went back and you said that MVP you thought was basically a lock from the region for TI. Do you think that then Fnatic has to do well to get a TI invite?
I kind of do. MVP has proven themselves much more on the international level, like significantly more, and Fnatic simply has not. I think I'm trying to like scan quickly through even like the early like fall time tournaments, and they had an appearance at ESL 1 New York, and since then they haven't even left like their continent to really duke it up with everyone else. So it's like, yeah, they've just been so closed in, and there's just not enough to see.
So according to the ELO charts, Gosu Gamers has them 4th, and they're 6th on Knoxville's. Can I cheat here? I want to make my word association with them Mushi. How about that?
Sure.
that is the thing. That is the player that most people associate the team with. And going back to Shanghai, I think I mentioned this in a previous pod, but a lot of people had been saying that one of the reasons they perform so well is that Kenji, who's their coach, has a very good relationship with Mushi, and that really helped in terms of allowing him to play his best, allowing him to lead his best for that team. And so, he obviously had that issue with kind of an injury or sickness. He wasn't able to play for a bit, and he's back. And so this team is different with a player of that reputation and talent. And is that to what extent is that going to work? And I think they surprised a lot of people because they did better than anyone projected in Shanghai. I mean, they beat OG, and this team, other than just Mushi, I think they're like a steadily improving team. I think they're part of a region that has been very overlooked and underestimated, and I think they're strong. And in spite of that, though, I don't have them in my top 8 just because I think that they're not better than the Chinese teams anymore, which they were apparently basically destroying in practice at Shanghai. And I think the Chinese teams are going to supplant the SCA ones still. But it would not surprise me if they did better than, say the NA teams or something like that. So and as for the invite, I'm kind of with you on this one. I feel like they're one of the likely flagship bearers for SEA, but I also feel that they haven't proven enough internationally, and I think they need a top 8 to get there.
They kind of passed the eye test, right? They've even taken pretty big series from, at the time we considered strong teams. They have some big names against, let's say, like Secret and eHome from ESL One Manila, I believe. But if Valve is gonna make the case that hey, we want wins in tournaments and we want good performances in majors, the Fnatic argument sounds weak. But when we take it, the eye test and them as just again we're touching on stuff like ELO rankings, then yeah, they are a strong team, but we still at the end of the day have to have a convincing resume to validate the invite from Valve. So there you go.
Yeah, they're maybe hurt by their region as well.
Yeah, that's
just overall, they have to. They're lucky to represent the region, but yeah, it doesn't do them any favors. All right, next up we've got OG.
9,000 freaking MMR.
That's a
what
number.
What the heck could you expect from OG? What else, right? I'm a believer in OG. I actually think they're gonna do pretty damn good. They put up a decent fight at Epicenter. I kind of had them in that tier of teams with Newbie and Liquid as I was watching the tournament. I felt like they were just a little bit lagging behind those two guys. But they have that wild card in their star playmaker, and that's the end of the story for me. It's just they could do so well here at the Manila Major, and I could see top 6, I could see top 4. It's just a matter of what kind of OG we see on that day. If they kind of build on their success and they're kind of peaking at the right time, which it kind of seems like they are, because they did kind of flounder a bit on the last major, but it seems with they had a recent win I think at Dream League, kind of looked pretty damn effortless, if I'm honest, and yeah, I think it's gonna look pretty damn good for these guys.
I've got them top 8 and top 4. The word I've got for them is ceiling. I think when this team feels a little bit like Secret in a sense when they're playing really well. It's like I don't know. They just feel like a different tier of team.
Yeah, different team. Yeah.
Aside from just Miracle, who enough has been said about that guy, just seems to not be human at times. When you watch Moon is another very interesting, I think, almost a feast or famine type of player. I remember just going back to the series I talked about with Fnatic. I think this is the second game. Moon played Void, and they won that game too. And that game was just if you look back to when Moon was playing Earthshaker at Frankfurt and stuff. There's just games where it's like this guy is insane with the kind of plays and rhythm that he's capable of getting into. For that Void game, it just felt like he totally dictated the pace of the game. They were so worried about the Chronosphere and what it could do that this guy was just up and down cliffs. He wasn't playing like a regular Dota player. He just knew exactly what he could push the boundaries on and where he needed to be. And it was just perfect. And you don't see those games all the time for Moon. Sometimes you don't get them. Sometimes you do. and the team just looks unstoppable. And actually, that game, I think, the game deciding fight was in fact a Chronosphere up by the high ground near Roshan, where I think Fnatic had no choice but to go through, and lo and behold, they got their team cut in half with the Chrono, and that was the end of that game. And so I think Moon is really the X factor to me for this team. And I've asked Chinese commentators about him, and some of them, have very different opinions. Some of them are like, this guy's clearly a Han player. You can tell from some of his tendencies and the strategy. You can tell by some of his jungling patterns sometimes for like heroes that he doesn't seem to like jungle as efficiently as maybe a veteran Dota player would.
Wow, are you serious?
That's really what I heard some of the Chinese analysts say. But when he's on, it's ridiculous. Like rhythm and tempo from the offlane, this guy's like, yeah. So I think he's a really big part of their team, obviously. I think they're going to top 8 at this tournament. I wouldn't be surprised if they top 4, and I'm fairly confident that they will. And as far as TI, I mean, I don't know if major winners get an automatic invite. This team has the benefit of continuity as well. They sometimes go fairly long stretches without playing, as we saw, like, basically after the summit. I think they didn't play until like just before Shanghai at MDL. They didn't play for like 2 months or something like that. So, but still, they have the chemistry, they have the familiarity, and I think they're confident in their roster. And I think just because of continuity and results, I think they're in a very good shape for TI. I think even if they played horribly at this event, which I'd seriously doubt, they're probably still going to make it to TI, because as long as they stay together, of course.
Yeah, I'm with you on that, 100%.
All right. Next up is complexity.
Complexity, huh? It's progressively harder to think of one word, and it's a little bit easier for me to sum it up in a few words, but I feel like with this team, when Swindle is doing his job as a captain and making it happen in the game, this team is like can be like an above average team to like an exceptional team. When we just mentioned something about ceiling, this team, I'm not so sure about their ceiling. I don't know if they have the ability to go top 2 in this kind of field. They haven't proven that they can make that kind of jump. Not in their LAN results, nor in their kind of performance in maybe some series. But I feel like when Swindle has that confidence and comes to come game day, if he comes with like a coherent battle plan in terms of the draft and also consistently performs in game, then this team can be quite strong. I could see them like top 8 in that kind of scenario, but I could see them also top 12 if it doesn't come together. And that kind of sounds, I just don't know if they can make it to the top 6 to top 4, but it is foreseeable maybe top 6, but I can't see them breaking into like the really really tough brackets in the top 4. What do you think, Jack?
My word for this team is grind. On like a smaller level, it's stuff like when you hear stories about, other people are relaxing or partying and Z-Freak is sitting there, in that booth playing. I know a lot of players do that, and so that specific anecdote doesn't tell you that much. But in terms of grind, this team seems to play in every single tournament. This team was, I think, one of the first after Shanghai to say we're not making any changes to our roster. They showed steady improvement basically through international tournaments. They keep hitting these milestones, like their first LAN win against Evil Geniuses recently. Obviously, a big deal was made of that. They're at every event, man. They play NA tournaments, they play qualifiers, they play Canada Cup, they play Summit 5, they play the Star Series Americas qualifiers, they play international events. They basically travel to anything they can get their hands on. As far as commitment and work ethic and like unique achievement, I think Hanskin, I believe, is an X Games gold medalist. And Swindle with all the various hats and the things that he's done in Han as well, and the different roles that he's filled. This team is about the grind. They travel, they play in everything. And so the consistency of the roster plus that willingness to constantly play and practice, I think it's going to do wonders for them. I think that process is maybe the most I don't maybe consistent out of just about any team, in recent months. Just like that arc of like they're going to keep doing their thing, and so I've got them in my top 8. I would not be surprised if they finished top 4. To be honest, this is a team also according to their manager Beef, who we've had on our show. It said that this team gets better and better as the tournament goes on. They kind of get in a groove and. I mean, it's hard to say to that because, right, we talked about the potential for this being a very short tournament. If you really don't do well, you could play 5 games and you're done. But I just think that all that stuff will pay off. The fact that they've traveled constantly and prepared and played and everything, that they've seen different metas, they have a lot of different ideas and exposure from playing in these different settings, and the trust and leadership of their franchise player, of course, Swindles. I think this team's going to do well at this major. I think this might be their quote-unquote breakout if the Shanghai one wasn't already. And so, in terms of TI, I think it's too easy to say that they need top 8, but I think because they're considered NA region and their players are kind of committed to basing themselves there, I think because of their growing international footprint, I think a top 10, top 8 puts them at TI.
Top 10, top 8 puts them in TI. I can get behind that. Yeah, I agree with that.
All right. Next up, we've got Alliance.
Okay, this is going to get a bit somber now, but which is going to bring a pretty harsh light to Alliance, and I'm going to say fading.
Ooh, okay.
It's a bit dark.
Finally, some controversy. Let's hear it.
But they beat Secret of recent at Epicenter in the playoff series, which isn't saying too much right now, unfortunately.
Oh, that must hurt hating on your favorite team too.
Gotta be real. Beat up on Complexity at Epicenter as well, and they got 2-0'd Complexity, and then they got 2-0'd by OG. So they picked up on that series win against Secret, and then they did beat Newbie, but then they got quickly slapped back down and lost that BO3. I think it's fading. I think the novelty and that kind of reinvigoration that they saw with the reformation of the TI winning lineup, we're on we're officially on the downturn of that spike, and I don't know where Alliance is in the grand scheme of things in the EU region, and they're kind of like the the people out on the outside looking in, I think, right now. And Valve kind of really went for the fences with how many invites they threw out for Manila Major, and Alliance, I think it was kind of close to the cutoff in my mind. And it's going to take some pretty gutsy performances from these guys, and a very convincing performance for them to validate anything close to an international invite. Because it's a kind of a question mark as to where they are right now. They haven't played too much. They have that one international LAN win, that Star Ladder series, which is going ever farther and farther in the rearview mirror in January, and that's the only thing they've been pointing to since. So that's the sunset, man. It's fading. It's fading, Jack.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you generally. My word is flexibility. This team seems to have, maybe inflexibility should be the word. This team seems to have like a style that they really enjoy. Like they put Loda on a hero that is very, maybe more heavily prioritized than a lot of other teams in terms of like farming and like making space for him, and they kind of trust him. But the rest of their team, usually when they succeed, it's a patch in which pushing seems to be a prominent place, either death ball or usually obviously split push we say, but death ball is kind of a corollary to that. When we saw that the 6.86 patch that was good to them, it was because pushing was an aspect of it, and they play usually very mobile lineups that have a good way of taking objectives and getting something off the map no matter what. And that seems to be their forte with this, of course, TI3 lineup. And that seems to be, if the meta drifts away from that, and I think the meta right now is probably greedier than it's been in a long time, and probably less about this kind of like split objective mobility type of lineup that they play.
Yeah.
So yeah, I feel like they've maybe taken some punishment for that. I don't know if they have the flexibility to change things up and just play differently, and play successfully differently. And again, it's not with the problem of like of farming and such. And Loda's been doing that for very well for a long time. That's not the issue. It's just even if he gets farmed and secures farm, is that still the style that you want to be playing coming into this meta and this tournament? And I don't know. I don't have them in my top 8. I think it's going to be a very difficult tournament for them unless they can adapt and change their playstyle.
Yeah. What do you think in terms of the conversation, in terms of the invite for TI? Is that even a conversation to have about Alliance at this point?
Look, I think they're going to get more slack than a lot of other teams because of the Alliance name.
Yeah.
I think we saw some evidence of that already in the months in between, where like it was like, oh, Alliance has awakened now all of a sudden with this patch or whatever, and then they were doing well, but then it seemed they got the benefit of the doubt more often than not, and they'll continue to do that. But in this case, I think they need to do a lot more, and I think they need like a top 6, top 4 type finish to get an invite to TI.
I'm thinking top 4, top 3. And that sounds really severe, but we just talked about Secret, Liquid, OG. Like the European invite situation is just so tight and congested, and you need a serious finish. And I don't even know if a top 3 was enough to stock up to like, the Secret argument, the OG argument, and the Liquid argument. And I think when you judge them against their peers, it just looks pretty grim for them, pretty dark. So
yeah, that's the thing. Europe is deep, right? So obviously they have recognition, but we've talked about Europe being a deep region. Yeah. You have a big slew of tournaments coming up in basically after this major. You've got ESL 1 Frankfurt. You've got Nanyang. Not sure who's going to that exactly. You've got Summit 5. And then you've got Star Series. And so between this tournament and TI, you have a lot of tournaments. And so, we talked about Valve leaning towards maybe having more invites and fewer qualifiers. But you really have to wonder, like, are they going to have to prove themselves on that stage just because, like, their success seems to have been so contained? Mm. And I think people had very high expectations for them actually going into the Shanghai Major. I think they were mentioned as one of the favorites because they played very well up to that point, and they finished I think 7th, 8th. They didn't finish so well in that tournament, and so I think that's raised a lot of questions. And yeah, I think they need a strong performance here to go to TI. Mm-hmm. Navi. Speaking of, well, you group these together for good reason. Navi.
I kind of have a different view of Navi. I see them as a tough team. That's the word that Woodshrew is going to drop on them. They have that. It's kind of a hard thing to describe and qualify, but it's just an impression that I get when I watch them play, and that they have a toughness to, like, they can take a punch, they can lose a game in a series, and they can come back, and they can always kind of fight it out. I feel they can always kind of rely on that because they have those incredible playmakers in Dichira and Dendi, and General is like he can perform with the best of the offlaners, I feel, and of course you have Soneko. And if Artstyle doesn't grave himself, then who knows what they could achieve, right? But yeah, these guys are tough. I just when I watch them play, they can still kind of bounce back, and they have just a resiliency that I think could mean some above average success for them. Well, how that translates to actual performance, I don't know if I can even slide them into the top 8, but on a Navi's good day, I think a top 8 is foreseeable. It is possible, and that's what I think.
They've been at they also seem to be one of those teams that's been at a lot of lands, but they don't really seem to win them, but
Yeah,
they do well. They like recently it's kind of been this resurgence again. Whenever Navi awakens, just like with the Lions, it's a really big deal just because of all the history and the brand and
for
the
sure.
big names and stuff. And so yeah, like they've been finally like getting their chance to go back to lands again and play at them, but they weren't able to finish the job. And I don't know. I don't know. In that sense, some people might think that there's something maybe liquid like about them, but it still feels like for domestic tournaments or tournaments that are on their home soil, like in Kiev, I don't think they were they even top four there. I think they struggled at Kiev, unless I'm mistaken. And so I don't know. I think it might be the same kind of issue. This might be a feast or famine team as well. I think is that's what you're getting at.
Yeah, it's they kind of come at you in their own predictable way. Like I don't see them kind of outdrafting you. I see them grabbing their team fighting heroes and trying to play Navi Dota. As much of that is kind of like a lame stream argument, but that's just it kind of rings true, unfortunately. So what you said is kind of correct. Like they show up a lot and they don't excel. They kind of are stuck in the middle of the pack, and whoever is the middle of the pack at that time, they kind of just duke it out in the kind of grimy way. Um, but they haven't been able to separate themselves and distinguish themselves.
Yeah, so they finished fifth through sixth, tied with Elite Wolves at We Play, and
Yeah.
I think people, again, given the field that We Play, I think people were expecting big things out of them, and
Mm.
that kind of didn't happen. And some of the momentum for this team going in might have just faded out with that. And so um, I think I think they need a top four. And so again, it's hard to say that because of what the organization is, but I think they need a top four finish to get to TI. I
Yeah,
think they have to do
I'll
really
take
well.
that one step further. I think they need like top two, like legit. They haven't won anything, and they are losing a lot. So they need like something just absurd to make that case that it's like the obvious back Kappa. So
Wow, top need a
they
top two.
need top two for an invite, dude. Look at
That
you. Look at you. Like, think about it. Like, some of these teams have just like, I don't. Yeah, no. Yeah, they need top two, man, or like top one. Like, actually. But anyways,
that's okay. That's so they are the team that has the most to gain and to prove at this event, more or less. That's what you're saying.
yeah. And if they lose, they lose. But if they win at all, they could, like seriously, like who, frig, they could be at TI next year, which is kind of crazy and cool. But that's a pretty steep hill to climb. Like of all the hills to climb, that's pretty freaking steep. There are a lot of great teams going to this major.
For the record, I don't think I could be mistaken. I don't think any team that's finished top six or top four has not been at the next major. It could be even more than that. But I mean that could just be because those teams tend to be consistent anyway. And
Right,
so
I believe that's the case, Jack. Yeah,
all
they
right,
have they have
so
to have results.
all right. So speaking of teams that we have questions that another old revered brand, some question marks about with big names, LGD.
Yeah, they kind of just like slid through the cracks, right, to get their invite here, and much to the chagrin of everyone who was supporting the newbie hype train, even though they probably didn't watch too much of the newbie hype train. And then when they got a chance to see the newbie hype train, it was like, okay, holy crap, newbie really deserved to have this spot. Um, and no, in a huge roundabout way, this is like the weird sister to Team Secret. I feel in the East, it's like we have so many talented players, and unfortunately, without like the difference is here that they don't have any major, they don't have any they don't have any successes at the majors to really point to with this new roster, and even like of recent, and so they're kind of coming in with recognition and just talent alone. I think. I guess maybe Jack, you can talk about their H Cup stuff, but yeah, they're just it's just it's just on the paper. That's all it is. I feel like their invite was based on, okay, these are the names on the player. Like these are the players and these are the names, and we have an extra China invite, and they're maybe as good at like they seem to be doing okay in China, and that's what kind of put them through. But I don't know how qualified they actually are in terms of competing for like a top 6 or top 8 of which we come to expect out of LGD and that brand. Like we expect excellence and superiority from this team name, and I don't know if they can deliver in this kind of field right now.
My word for this team is going to be face. The Chinese concept of face, the whole reputation and how people perceive you. This is a team that they came in third at the Starlighter Invitational, and I talked about this before with Newbie, where it was like, it would suck if Newbie did well and if they didn't make it through the Manila qualifier because they didn't get a chance to play an international event before then, and LGD did, and so. LGD came in third at that event. They didn't even come in second or didn't win the event, obviously, either. But that was apparently impressive enough to help. This was probably the most controversial invite because
Yeah,
they were
absolutely.
invited instead of Newbie. This was an international event, so it did send a good message, I think, that you need to, as a Chinese team, you need to get outside of China and go play, prove yourself on an international stage. LGD, I think, as much as anybody, is about the potential and the names behind it. You're talking about Zhao 8, who in a manner related to Face, is like it almost feels like he's too big for non-TI, non-major tournaments. He just takes that period off in between and doesn't play, and he comes back, and everyone expects him to be this like kind of savior figure, right? And so the potential put into that team from him, from all the big names they have on the roster, like aggressive. Um, this, I mean, this team is like expected to do so well, and they're given maybe more of the benefit of the doubt in that sense as being when you need a certain floor of representatives from China, you're gonna look at LGD and IG and those organizations, and if they're fielding a decent roster with players that they're getting invited, right?
Mm.
So I think this is going to be the worst performing Chinese team at this event. I
Yeah.
do not have them in my top 8, and
Yeah.
I I think there's still questions with this team in terms of consistency. I
Absolutely.
think they did win the ESL One Frankfurt qualifier, but beyond that, there's just not really been anything exceptional about this team, and they really struggled for a long time in domestic tournaments and such. And so I don't know. Like there were signs that they'd begun to put things together and were playing well. Then there were signs that they hadn't put things together and they hadn't really, and they need to get rid of some of the old names maybe and make room for the new. And so also in terms of fit, aggressive plays was just a great fit on CDEC, and sometimes he has looked out of place
Yeah.
with this team. Where it's like, what do you expect him to do? Like he didn't excel at being the type of person that you would sit out there to farm. He excelled at fighting together with his team, and sometimes it doesn't look like they play that way. So I don't think this team is going to top 8 this event, and
To get to TI?
frankly, I think they need to get that invite. I think they need to.
Top 8, you said?
Yeah, I think so. In spite of all that stuff I said before about the reputation and the name, I actually think that they do. Because if the perception of China in general grows, and you have like teams that aren't traditional big brands like Wings and maybe Vici Reborn being in good shape for TI, then you have to look closer at the next tier of brand name teams that are not LGD and say who's doing better domestically.
I sorry, I just knocked over some the cup on my table. I think LGD needs top 4, so I'm putting it a little bit higher, and they also need an international win. They need to outperform Vici, Gaming Reborn, and Wings Gaming somehow at this tournament, at the major. And they also need to pick up an international win, which would probably be the ESL One Frankfurt that they qualified for. I think that's how they get a leg up on those two other Chinese teams to like kind of lock their Chinese invite in. And barring that, like they're screwed. So, yeah, definitely expected not to be up there. Like I said, they need a top 4, but like again, I believe they're going to be sitting in the ninth to 12th to to the last place, which maybe not last place, but 9th to 12th maybe. Like, yeah, that's where I slide them in.
Yeah, that's just a good point actually. I think Frankfurt is going to be really big for them, depending on how they do here. Like they're going to have that opportunity to prove themselves again. But yeah, I think I'll actually change my projection to top four as well for getting that TI invite because they have a lot to prove.
Mm.
And I think there's maybe a general trend towards not wanting to reward teams based on necessarily names and recognition anymore because you don't want Chinese teams to get complacent. You don't want these people to get complacent, really. So maybe that'll put even more pressure on them. All right. Next up, DC.
Unproven, untested. They need to play some international competition, right? Like they've qualified to everything out of the Americas. If there's an America qualifier, DC is gonna like wipe the floor with almost everyone, save for maybe if Complexity didn't get an invite, which is pretty rare to see, I suppose. And we need to see them play some real international competition. And this is their first opportunity, right? So that's pretty much it in a nutshell, I think. And again, like these, I think this will pretty much be the case. So I don't even know if it's worth mentioning. I guess New B, out of all these qualified teams, which will be the next thing we'll touch on, their case is different in terms of what warrants a TI invite. But for DC and the rest of the qualified teams, it's just you go big, like top two, or go home because you're not going to get an invite. You're going to still have to qualify the hard way.
So you're putting them in Navi's boat in the sense that they have to absolutely kick ass here to get the TI invite.
Absolutely. For an invite, yeah.
I I can't really disagree with you on the word association of untested and unproven. I think that's really it right there.
Mm-hmm.
This is a very young team. I wouldn't go solely far as unproven because Misery and Weha just won the last major. It feels difficult saying that a team that has those players is unproven. But the rest of the players are all very young. I think with the exception of Misery, everyone on this team is 20 or 21 and younger. They have some results, but they're less known. As you said, they've been stomping NA teams in their region, but nobody really knows if that's an accurate barometer. I think for this team, it's probably more of a dark horse. I think their players have a lot to prove. Again, the theme with like how big of a factor were they to Secret's success, and how easy is it to replace them? Because in terms of play, like Weha played very impressively in a lot of games for Secret, right? So they have something to prove in that department. And if teams aren't really looking at them or taking that seriously, again, this is maybe a team that you don't prepare for as much if you're from another region, and so you can very easily be surprised by them. And so I think they're going to do better than expected. I don't have them projected for top 8, but it would not surprise me at all if they did. And I think they need a. Again, I won't go so as far as to say top 2 because finishing the top 4 drastically changes the perception of your team. So I'm going to go with top 4. I think they need top 4 to get a TI invite.
Okay. Yeah, I think top 8 would be a moderate surprise for me. I think that would be pretty damn good to see out of DC. But I think that's pretty much all we needed to say on Digital Chaos.
All right. Next up, as you said, Newbie.
Yeah, man. It's so funny that they're all the way down here. Cough, cough, Elf. Nice. Great job, guys. So 20 games in a freaking row. Testing Liquid at Epicenter, going all the distance in the grand finals, losing out 2-3 in the end. But these guys, if there was ever an eye test, and like these guys just are incredible. If invites for TI were on that alone, like these guys have earned it already, right? Just for what they've done. As a word to describe, can I just say Chuan? I guess because Moo's been sitting at New
just
B.
used up your player card.
Yeah, I used it. I think I used it athlete. No, I'm not trying to like self promote here, but Moo was just kind of sitting on the newbie bench on the newbie roster, kind of just like fermenting and I'm trying to say rotting in a nice way, but yeah, Moo was just chilling here. Hao was kind of doing his little circuit, exploring his roster situations on these different teams to pretty sub, just not impressive results, and then you somehow throw Chuan in the mix and put together this new roster with those cores, and all of a sudden we have the next force out of China, which kind of came out of just nowhere, right, Jack? I don't know if anyone really saw this streak coming and how dominant and just the level of Dota they were playing. It's just like an incredible click for these players, and so um, yeah, I'm just thinking just you mix in equal parts Chuan, Hao, and Mu, and the secret ingredient is Chuan really, and yeah, these guys are just incredible. And in terms of finish, like I expect top four, plain and simple. I expect top four, and as far as TI invites, I think if they get that top four, they are right there. I honestly, they should be in the front of the line for the China region invite if they can just close this out with a top four and some solid results along the way, just based on their just elo, right, and just their game performance against everyone else. I think that's pretty much the newbie argument.
My word for this team is resurgence. Both personally and in terms of for their scene. You look at actually a lot of the players in this roster, as you mentioned, the holdovers from that newbie squad and Tong Fu before that. You're talking about Chuan, Hao, and Mu. These were players on. These are all TI winning players. They've been on teams that won it, and then fairly similarly seem to have a huge drop off in terms of maybe motivation or players getting old and such. And I was very shocked at Frankfurt when this team lost to a team unknown. Actually, they didn't seem to nearly as upset or animated about it. Like they kind of argued a little very shortly after the game, and everybody just left, and they're just kind of just like, and that fit the narrative of like this team going to play RPGs after TI4, losing all their motivation, or counting on streaming and such. But they have led the Chinese resurgence that I think is going to happen at this event. And part of the reason that 29 game winning streak maybe didn't earn them that direct invite or was overlooked was because of the China region in general after Shanghai. It was,
Yeah.
people were wondering how many invites is that region going to get. And they did so poorly in their home turf. Like that was just a shocker. And so that watered down what people thought of the 29 game winning streak. And they went out and proved at Epicenter that they're force and that they're legit. And the Chinese teams have been proving post reshuffle that they're also legit and that they're ramping things up for TI. So newbie to me, especially with Chuan finding a new team, finding his place with them, represents that resurgence of Chinese Dota to me. And I think that I have this as one of my top two teams as well. Like I think, or top three. I'm pretty sure that they're going to be playing on the last day or two of this tournament. They look really strong, and And as for finishes, I think I'm gonna draw the line at top 8. I think the Epicenter performance and the rising perception of the Chinese, who have traditionally done very well at TI just about every year, and so this perception that they ramp things up for TI, that's gonna make their win streak and domestic success look more impressive. So I don't think they have to do too well at this tournament. I would go as far as to say if they finish top 12, top 8, they're going to get invited.
All right. There's 2 teams left.
All right. Let's go with Empire.
I see these guys as the ones who could surprise everyone, honestly. Maybe not so far as surprise everyone. Okay, I'll try to dial that back a bit. I think they could make the greatest leap in terms of like their kind of standing internationally in terms of how they're regarded and in terms of EU as well. I think that their play, the eye test looks really good for these guys. They look very fearsome at times playing against some top teams. And in terms of all the CIS qualifiers, they're kind of in the same boat as DC. They just kind of wipe them. And so Empire stands to gain the most respect out of this tournament. Now, as far as a TI bid, we're talking some incredible success to kind of displace the ones who are kind of expecting invites at this point. And so they need some miraculous top 4 to top 2 shenanigans and some international wins as well. But they have been involved on the international tournament circuit quite heavily actually in the last couple of months, and Yeah, I think they're a team with like definitely on the rise. In contrast to the other EU teams we mentioned, Alliance and Navi, they're definitely trending upwards, while those two teams are kind of either trending downwards or slightly staying where they're at.
Yeah, this team looks very sharp at times, um, and I mean their region is like a very difficult region, even with like Navi say not as strong in recent years. There's a lot of chaos and reshuffling over in CIS, but generally speaking, it's hard to like find a group that can really distinguish itself from that. We see this problem with CIS teams at a lot of tournaments where it's like they come in with high expectations or kind of feast or famine type teams, and there's always there's always some kind of letdown. Like Virtus Pro was expected to be at a certain place. Um, Empire. So the word kind of means, can they break the trend? For me is, can they break the trend of teams from CIS having those kinds of expectations and not living up to them? And in this case, I feel like the better word might even be underrated. I think teams maybe aren't looking as well at this roster, and the youth that they have,
Hmm.
the relatively smaller names that some of their players have compared to you know a Goblack or something like that. So I think this team is underrated. I don't have them in my top eight, but I think they're going to surprise some people. I think they could potentially knock off a very strong team in their group,
Yeah.
and just be a surprise type of team. This is like the X Factor team for me. So I don't have them top eight, but I think they need top eight to get that TI invite, show that consistency. So yeah, that's where I stand on this. So last team, we've got Mineski.
All right, Jack. You're gonna have to take this one, man. Like, I don't have any words. Like, I ran out of all words. Not even just adjectives. I can't. I couldn't tell you what Mineski's about. I could tell you that they won the C qualifier for Manila Major, but I couldn't tell you to what dominance or what specific means they'd achieve that. But yeah, Jack, what do you think about Mineski?
Uh, I I can't think of too many good words that I want to use here, but um, just overlooked is the one that I would use most commonly. I mean, they had a roster change. They won their qualifier. They had a pretty big roster change. They lost a couple of players to Rave, I believe, and they're part of a region that's traditionally not really been respected. Um, Obviously, that's changed a little bit with Fnatic and MVP, but even so, this team has not done well internationally, basically anywhere. And sometimes it feels like they almost get there by default because of their region.
Mm.
So if we're talking about like say the last MDL, um, if we're talking about the Summit, for instance, um, if we're talking about the major, well, they weren't at the last major. They just the Frankfurt major, for instance. This team
Yeah.
just they don't seem to be. They seem to be the team that's least on the tier of their other major level competitors, right? And
Mm.
so they have a lot to prove in the sense of showing that they're actually a legitimate team, that they've improved, that their roster changes are working, and that Pinoy Dota is making that transition to Dota 2. And because they've, as general, that country hasn't really done that as quickly. They've been very slow to come on board for various reasons into Dota 2. And so they have so much to prove. I don't think things will go well for them. I don't have any reason to believe that they're
Yep.
on that top tier of teams. And this is the one team that I would actually be surprised if they made the top eight.
Yeah, I feel you. Like, we just don't have a trajectory that would lead us to believe this is a top eight team or this is a team that's on the rise to achieve great things at Manila Major. Definitely not compared to the body of work that some of these teams are bringing.
Yeah, and because of the kind of lack of roster continuity and maybe general lack of regard for the region, I think this team needs a top, I don't know, probably top three, top four, as ridiculous as it sounds, to get a
So
TI invite.
absurd. Yeah, always hard to reach. Oh,
Yeah, so uh, there we have it. Who do you think? Who are your top two teams? Who do you think is going to win this tournament?
Oh, newbies, newbie, liquid, and then you could trade in secret or OG in the top four. That's how I hold it. I have newbie as my favorite. What about you?
All right, newbies up there for me. I think Wings, newbie, VGR. I think that the Chinese are going to make a really strong statement at this tournament, and beyond that, OG and Secret. I think Secret is actually 14th out of 16th in terms of ranking of elos of the major teams in both Ghost of Gamers and Knoxville. But as going by trends, you can never count this team out at major tournaments. The level of leadership and talent is there. It's always going to be there as long as Puppy is around. And I would never be surprised if they won a tournament at any point. So, yeah, that's how I think this is going to go. And you know what? If you go back and look at our breakdown of the teams and some of our predictions, we think that this is a fairly wide open tournament, right?
Yeah.
Like a lot of teams have a chance. Like we wouldn't really be totally shocked if almost any of these teams did really well. Like what team would you absolutely be shocked if they ended up in the top four? I think you'd be really shocked if Moneski did. I think you might be surprised if, say, a DC.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, just because I haven't seen them just destroy international competition, right? But yeah, Manaski, I would be shocked. But everyone else, it's like, okay, they put it together. Like, all right, Alliance is back, Navi is back, right? That kind of thing. Xiao 8 is back. That's possible, right? Maybe not likely, but all within the realm of a foreseeable like situation. So
Yeah, and I think that reflected on the invite process as well. I think that probably justified having, more invites, just because a lot of these teams feel like they're in the same tier, and there was nobody that was really clear cut. But the teams below them that didn't get the invites, like those teams seem clearly to be a cut below, as in terms of recent results or roster consistency. And so I actually like that they had more invites for this. And for the other reasons that we mentioned too for this major, like wanting to encourage people to play third-party international tournaments instead of focus exclusively on qualifiers. It served that purpose too, but I think just the field of teams and the depth is pretty good, and so it'll be fun. And looking forward to this major. I'll be reprising my role as a translator. I'm not sure what that means at this point or how much, but it'll be fun. And we're looking forward to this major for sure. What are your plans coming up? You're traveling this coming month as well, right?
yeah, we've got traveling with my family to actually China, returning to the roots, visit some relatives. Getting older, so come and chat it up and show some face and reconnect with some of my old folks and some of my relatives there. I guess I'll be catching the major on China time on that account, which might actually be okay, given that it's being held in Manila. So looking forward to see you on the screen, Jack. As usual, you're obligatory. I've got to at least see you once. Got to see you pass that mic and do your job as fine as anyone else. So yeah,
I don't know about as usual. I have no idea if I'll even be on the screen, but we'll see how it goes.
Man. You're like 2 for 2. You're like 2 for 2. Like shut up. Well,
It'll be fun. It'll be fun being in the Philippines. And then I will be at Nanyang after that, actually. So the show, as far as the show, just it's been only a few weeks since we've been reunited, and it's just been the two of us, and now we have to separate again for who knows how long. Sure, I'll miss you, even though we'll be in the same neck of the woods, so to speak.
yeah. We'll see if we can get some CN Dota in together. That'd be fantastic. If we can figure out how to get on there.
You like the Lose MMR? Because that's what CN Dota is
I'm
for
down.
everyone.
I'm down. Isn't that what we do anyways? Like.
All right, sounds good. So over here at DotP, we'll have a solution to this, and of course, our network of shows is always growing, and we'll keep that going one way or another. I've made episodes from Shanghai before, so I might try to do that again if I'm in Asia, but we'll see. So thank you for listening to this episode. As usual, tomorrow will be Theorycraft Thursdays with Ursinity and Proud. You can follow us, our show, a network of shows on Twitter at .p_show. You can find me at KBBQ Dota and my co-host at Woodshrew Dota. Thank you very much for listening in. I expect many of our predictions to just look totally foolish, but that's part of the whole fun of predictions. And so looking forward to another exciting major event coming up. Thank you very much for listening in, and hopefully we'll be on the airways with you again soon. Take care.